is the resolution for the airport improvements grant approval. A little bit of history on that. Gary is going to, and before we get started here, I want to talk about a couple of things. And one is the stuff that we're going to learn tonight really isn't any different than what we've already known for a number of years. We're going to reiterate a number of different things that we've talked about in the past. But it's a good time for our public and our audience to be able to reflect and see some of those things that we've been doing all along. And so with that, I'm going to start off with a little history of the airport for those that do not know that, and Moscow's historical involvement in the airport. If you can follow me up here on the screen. In September 1939, 77 years ago, B.B. Parker, the mayor of Pullman, and Henry Hansen, the mayor of Moscow, signed an agreement creating the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport. So for 77 years, this city has been in partnership with and in collaboration with the city of Pullman for our airport. And there's a number of, under the agreements and provisions, the mayors of both cities and a representative from each city, as you can read, how we selected the board back in those days, pretty much how we do it now. We each have a city and a county and a university is what we've done, and a person at large. And the land for the airport was leased from the city of Pullman, and all the expenses and revenues were to be shared by both the cities, Pullman and Moscow. One thing I want to mention today, city staff, we had 4 people diligently working for a number of hours to put this presentation together. And the interesting and neat thing about this, it'll be marked June 20th, 2016, so anybody in the future that has questions about these very things that come before us will have this that they can refer back to. I want to start off something of interest I will talk about, if I can find my sheet of paper. It's here somewhere. Tucked in my narrow. 2017 was when the first talks of the runway realignment came.
That was 2007.
Oh, 2007, what did I say? 2017? Okay, 2017.
We're not quite there yet. So.
Oh, I'm missing, Gary, I'm missing that one piece of paper I had. Do you happen to have that?
Is that face down over there?
I wanted to read
I don't,
it.
sir, but I could certainly paraphrase what it said.
Okay, well, in I had it here earlier. In 2007, in June 4th of 2007, there was a airport board meeting, and Mayor Nancy Cheney at that time reported to this council that they had agreed on a realignment process for the airport and accepted option 2C. And then she went on and talked about Kelly Brown, who was the advisor of the attorney at that time, who still is for the airport board, and some agreements with some other things. So I thought that would be kind of interesting if you go back to June of 07, June 4th, that document was there. So I kind of got a kick out of that, and I thought I'd share that with everybody. So the process of the realignment talks began around that time, and when I took over in January 2014 as the mayor, the first airport board meeting that I went to, interestingly, I found out that we were right in the midst of things happening. We also already had an environmental assessment agreement that had taken place prior to that. And of course, the mayor of Pullman is the chair of the airport board, and the mayor of Moscow is the vice chair of that board. So with that, and I'm going to add some things in there, but it's kind of interesting. We're going to talk about open houses in the spring and the match money. And one of the things that we worked diligently for, both the Pullman side and the Moscow side, was we were looking for grant monies because we knew that this project was going to be a $119 million project, and the percentages of match for Washington was 10%. The match for Idaho was a little over 6%. And we were able to get passed through our senators of both states, Senators of Washington and the Senators of Idaho, that worked together to get that matching down to 8.125, which saved us a ton of money. And for this $119 million project, roughly we were looking at $9.7 million that we needed to get between the sponsors and other folks that were helping us as the University of Idaho, Washington State University, Latah County, Whitman County, well as other private individuals, which turned out that Ed Schweitzer and crew gave us $2 million total, so to get to that $9.7 million match. And so the first, with that, we'll start off the next slides, I guess, Gary.
Okay. And thanks for the opportunity to bring the airport financing agreement back in front of the public. As you can see from the listing, the bullet points on this next slide, that we have a long history with the airport, beginning, as the mayor just quoted, in 1939. Pretty fast and furious, the beginning of the 70s and then the 80s, and then lately, when the realignment project came forward, we had a fire flow project that was worked on back in the late 2007, 2009. Then, of course, in 2014, as the project was moving forward on the FAA funding was becoming solidified, looked like the grant was coming through. FAA looked at the operating agreement that Pullman and Moscow had regarding the operation of the airport and indicated, because we were moving ahead and with a fairly large project, that as the two sponsors of the airport, City of Pullman and the City of Moscow, we needed to make some changes to that joint operating agreement. So that was done in 2014, and that's the one that is in place today. But just an illustration of how that has kind of evolved over the years.
Gary, before we go further, I want to mention something. One of the reasons when we talked to our Washington State senators and our Idaho U.S. senators and state senators, but U.S. senators from both states, one of the things we do not have in our fine area on the Palouse, we have no freeways, we do not have any waterways, we do not have a rail system. So our only supermotor transportation for us going into these next decades is a good airport. And so that was very important for a bunch of us and collectively. So with that, go on, Gary. I'm going to plug some things in as we go along here.
And I think the mayor mentioned that in early 2014, as it appeared the construction prices were increasing, the FAA had additional things they wanted to do at the airport. The estimate on the construction costs went up significantly as the engineers, planners were essentially instructed by the airport board that they wanted to have an estimate that was conservative, in that once it was set, they wanted to live within that. So they didn't want, okay, we've reached that estimate, now we need more funding to continue on. So that's where the $119 million amount that the mayor just mentioned came from. Okay, so going back again and how this came forward, and we'll eventually get to the finance piece, but it all ties together. So in November of 2013, there were open houses regarding the airport that also essentially laid the project out, how it's going to move ahead, stages, those sorts of things. The environmental assessment was being completed, and we were getting ready to move ahead. So that just lists out the public open houses, so on and so forth, that went through. And you can go back. The minutes of those open houses are they're available from the FAA. We were given copies of most of them, and they're fairly thick. And anybody who commented, written comments or oral comments, it was all written down as well. So at that point, the project was becoming a reality. It was in that same time frame that the new estimate was developed. And so at some point, as the mayor mentioned, the match that we were still trying to get reduced was still at 10% at that time, because the physical location of the airport is in the state of Washington, which was a 10% match. So went to a couple of meetings, and it became clear that we were going to have to start finding a way to finance that match. So in, I would say, May or June of 2014, as we were preparing the FY 2015 budget, we were requested to come up with a formula by which the City of Moscow, as a sponsor, could participate in the airport project. So at that point, staff developed a proposal for $2.5 million that we thought that could be funded to bring it forward and present it to the City Council. So on July 7th of 2014, then Finance Director Don Palmer and the city attorney, Rod Hall, put together a memo which was distributed to council, which essentially said that there are two ways you could proceed with this. We looked into general obligation bond funding. That didn't appear to be something that was applicable for a project or a property in the state of Washington, although the law was clear that the city could own and could invest in properties outside of our jurisdiction.